Now, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine has multiple economic ramifications as Africa imports $4 billion in global grains and oilseeds. This is including wheat, maize, sunflower, oil, barley, as well as soybeans. Now, even before COVID-19 and the July 2021 civil unrest emphasized the importance of diversifying supply chains, South Africa's trade balance and weaknesses on the rand prompted a rethink as businesses shifted to local inventories. Now, with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement on the table, is the Ukraine crisis an opportunity for Africa? To elaborate on this, we are joined by analyst on African trade and the head of communications at the University of Limpopo, Victor Eswana. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us in studio. Very good to see you so bright and early. Let's first of all, let's talk about the ramifications on African food supply in particular, amongst other things that has come out since this war has begun.
Morning, Buhle. It's good to see you. When we talk bread and butter issues, we come into studio. We don't do Zoom, right? But they say never waste a good crisis. I've heard so many versions of that statement, but the essence of it, they used to say necessity is the mother of invention. So the impact is exactly that which it is. If we are importing anything, by the way, there's a topic for another time, why Africa should import anything to eat, because 20% of the world's Earth's surface is Africa, and most of it is arable, believe it or not. So why we should be importing any food is baffling. But the impact, of course, is what we call globalization, that because the world is doing trade with one another across different regions, when there's a crisis in an area like Asia or parts of the world where there's conflict right now, you are going to have that kind of disruption. Some of these things like oils and wheat are not even things we discuss on a daily basis. And consider where bread is, where wheat is. But I always say, here's another opportunity. Wheat is not really an African crop. So is maize. So maybe in the long term, I know that's a little radical, but we should be asking, where are the African crops that we should be growing, like teff, like sorghum, and all those other alternatives that are even much healthier. But the disruption is exactly what it is. Whoever exports to Africa, because of the sanctions, because conflict by itself disrupts logistics, it will be a real situation. And thinking we are coming out of the COVID disruption, we are going to be seeing a real problem. Remember, food insecurity is still a large issue on the African continent.
I mean, it's quite mind-boggling when you think about the fact that Africa imports 30% of wheat from Russia, Ukraine, as well as maize, and these are our staples, so to speak.
It is, and countries like the DRC, which have a huge land mass, and when you farm anything in the DRC, you don't need irrigation because rainfall figures are just so high. The soil is so fertile. Most of the tropical countries, by that I mean countries that are above the Tropic of Capricorn, Zambia going up to Zimbabwe, Zambia going up, and countries that are below the Tropic of Cancer, of course. So between the two tropics, along the equator, many African countries there, very wonderful climate for farming just about anything, and you can do it without any irrigation. The soil is fertile, and that's the bigger question we should be having. Why is it that when agriculture employs so much in terms of the percentage, the highest percentage of employment in Africa is created by agriculture? The problem is its subsistence. So we should find a way of increasing the use of technology, the use of organic fertilizers so that the production can reach the level above subsistence so that we stop importing food from places so far away.
You make mention of fertilizers. That's one of the imports as well that we look at from getting from the Ukraine and Russia. How do we work around that in particular? Because that allows us to grow the crops.
Honestly, we should drop any imported fertilizer. Remember, fertilizer is nature's way, or should be nature's way, of recycling biomass. You and I, as much as gory as it is, when we die, we have to decompose because we come from the earth. So there's no need anybody should be importing any fertilizer because biomass itself, composting, and a whole lot of other things that are part of the earth itself in the form of organic matter should be used. It's also healthier, and for the sake of the environment, is much more sustainable. It's much more responsible to not import fertilizers, but to use organic fertilizer as much as possible. It would create more jobs, because when you create fertilizer, the technology that goes with the shredding and the composting and the processing, that turns organic matter into fertilizer, would create even more jobs, which means we go upstream in agriculture and get the inputs to be produced locally as well.
And taking or removing that international supply chain lessens the carbon footprint as well.
Yeah.
Let's talk now about not wasting a good crisis. What are some of the opportunities that lie ahead?
Remember, Buhle, we just signed the African Continental Free Trade Area, right? Which means, in simple terms, remove the barriers of doing trade among African countries. So if anything should have taught us to think about that with a lot more urgency, this is it. The first thing was COVID, because COVID proved that we cannot rely on international tourists, so we must develop local tourism, which makes more money than international tourism, by the way. Now, this is another opportunity. Africa, we have always been saying, should be the food basket of the world, as in it should produce enough food to feed the rest of the world, which is why you see China coming in. They're not just looking for minerals, they're looking for the land as well, because they can produce food. So the way to turn this crisis into a good opportunity is to say to ourselves, if we have been talking about intra-Africa trade, and if we know that so many African countries have so much fertile land and climate that's suitable for efficient agriculture, let's build it into the Africa Continental Free Trade Area as a priority project, and let's accelerate that collaboration among African countries, especially in countries like the DRC that have a lot of arable land and a lot of good climate, because it will be cheaper to produce most of the things we buy from there.
Yeah, but now that then we have to look at, what is consumed on the African continent. The fact that maize and wheat are still such staples, particularly in the southern regions of Africa. How do we work around that? Injera perhaps being one of the alternatives?
Well, that's why I said it was a little radical. I don't eat a lot of maize and a lot of wheat myself. Because remember, lots of Africans are gluten intolerant, right? So the kind of protein that is found in some of these so-called staple foods are actually not conducive to us. So injera, which is what the Ethiopians used to make they use teff. It's a relative of wheat, but it's more African. So if we start cultivating more sorghum, more millet, more of the products that are already known to be healthier and good for the African kind of body, we will be doing that. But maybe that would be a little too radical. We still can produce maize. I don't think we should make maize sound like it's the enemy. I'm simply saying, if we produce it, let's produce it locally, because we have land that is not being used as we speak. Abundant. I'm not talking small tracts of land. I'm talking lots of it. If you go to the DRC and check how much they import, you'll be shocked, because the land they have is amazing for that. Countries like Cameroon, countries like Nigeria, all those were agricultural economies. Before Nigeria became the oil economy that we know, it was agriculture. So find alternative crops that are more African, more suited, but that is more medium to long term. For the short term, I would say, let's say we have the Africa Free Trade Area Agreement that we have already signed. We signed it, I think, at the beginning of 2020, and it is in force. This is an opportunity to push ourselves even further, because this is a life and death issue. That if you can't produce food, you are risking not only the health and life of your people, you are risking socio-political instability. Hungry people are not going to be very governable. So if we don't address it for any other reason, let's address it for peace and stability, because then Ukraine and Russia would not have exported the shortage of food. They would have exported the crisis to the African soil as well.
And in those conversations like this that we're hoping will lead African leaders to start to think about that, and perhaps look at including that in the Agenda 2063 as we look forward to that. Let's talk about, we've spoken about intracontinental trade. Let's talk about exporting. Africa's natural gas reserves are, in the trillions of cubic feet. We know Nigeria is leading that with over 200 trillion cubic feet just in Nigeria alone. And yet we're still looking or we're not really capitalizing on that. Nigeria,
Ghana, but you're talking the West Coast. You can come down the West Coast, you'll find countries like Angola, a major producer of oil. Remember, gas goes with oil, right? Because they're all hydrocarbons. But you're overlooking even countries that are closer to China and India, which are countries like Mozambique on the east coast of Africa in the southern parts. And if you go up north, Tanzania, another highly underrated producer of gas and oil. But so is Kenya, And inland, you have Uganda, which is a major country with regard to the reserves. And then you can go all the way up. So from at least Tanzania, Kenya, coming down to Mozambique and South Africa, that coast stands a chance. If we get our act together to be able to capitalize on whatever shortage that will be created by this situation, both in the short term and in the long term.
And let's quickly talk about, and lastly, about, just how much of an opportunity this could actually provide for Africa to even be a measure to raise funds. We're currently going out, we go to IMF, we go to World Bank, and we do these loans. China comes and they give us this money, but we could not even raise funds, but we could make an income here.
Bushe, Ethiopia just built a dam called the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Initially, it was going to cost just over $4 billion, $4 billion US dollars. Ethiopia raised 3.8 billion of that through the things in South Africa we call Stokvels and collective savings scheme. They went to Ethiopians and raised $50 from this one, 500 from this one. We don't even need the World Bank with over 1 billion Africans. We can crowdfund this. Remember, our grandmothers, our aunties, you and I belong to some kind of a saving scheme or another. That's how you'd really cash in on indigenous knowledge and organizational grit. We don't need anybody to lend us money. We can lend ourselves the money. Ethiopians proved it to us when they built the largest dam in the southern hemisphere through collective and crowdfunding.
Fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it this morning. That is author and analyst on Africa business and trade, as well as the head of communications at the University of Limpopo. That's Victor Khomo Eswana. Thank you so much once again to him.